In 2022, despite the challenges posed by the pandemic, India has received 6.2 million foreign tourists with a growth of. एक second. Okay, that's my first slide. Okay. पढ़ाई देता है ना? 6.2 million foreign tourists with a growth of 307%. The travel and tourism sector in India contributed 9.2% of the country's GDP in terms of employment, generated 44.6 million jobs, which is approximately 8.5% of the total employment. The contribution of the travel and tourism to India's economy, including both direct and indirect impacts, estimated 426 billion. India, next slide. India is ranked 54th in the World Economic Forum's Travel and Tourism Development Index. By 2030, India is expected to be among the top 5 business travel markets. During India's G20 presidency, more than 200 meetings were held, blah, 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 blah. The year 2023 was declared Visit India Year 2023 in a bid to position India as a 360-degree holistic development. Okay. Creative tourism. Creative tourism was the first time defined in 2000 by Richard and Raymond, emphasizing the significance of creativity in planning and the development of cultural tourism. Creative tourism offers a new way of redesigning the cultural landscape, including festivals, cultural routes, museums, and heritage, to have an interactive role and more engaging experiences co-created between visitors and the local population. Pine and Gilmore in 1998 elaborated on their experience economy, a notion of consumers, including tourists, in search for emotionally satisfying, memorable personal experiences. Blah, 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 blah. Programming platform. And I'm also the curator of the Royal Opera House in Mumbai. So welcome. Thank you for being here post-lunch. Promise not to put you all to sleep. I know it's the food coma time. Welcome to, I'm going to sit if you don't mind. I have a bit of a presentation before I invite my very esteemed panel to join me out here. Welcome to Creative Tourism, Museums as a Muse at Bridges 2024 by Rare India. Firstly, I'd like to thank founder partner Shobha Rudra for inviting Avid Learning and giving us the opportunity to collaborate and partner on this topic that is very important and very close to my heart and our curatorial philosophy at Avid Learning. As all of you know, inbound tourism in India has experienced a significant growth within the country, India emerging as a popular destination for international travel. In 2022, despite the challenges posed by the pandemic, India received 6.2 million foreign tourists with a growth of 307%. The travel and tourism sector in India contributed to 9.2% of the country's GDP. In terms of employment, it generated 44.6 million jobs, which was approximately 8.5% of the total employment in India. The total contribution of travel and tourism to India's economy, including both indirect and direct impacts, was about 426.2 billion. Small numbers like that. India is currently ranked 54th in the World Economic Forum's Travel and Tourism Development Index of 2021. By 2030, India is expected to be among the top 5 business travel markets. And the source of this is FICCI's 2023 Inbound Tourism in India, Unlocking the Potential. During India's G20 presidency, more than 200 meetings were held in more than 50 locations across the country, and the year 2023 was declared as the Visit India Year 2023 in a bid to position India as a 360-degree holistic destination in major international source markets. India's vision for 2047 is to become a $1 trillion industry. To achieve this goal, the government has formulated draft strategies for national tourism policy and is diversifying tourism offerings by exploring new and unique tourism products such as cultural and heritage tourism, adventure tourism, ecotourism, and wellness tourism. Coming to the topic at hand, creative tourism. Creative tourism was first time defined in 2000 by Richard and Raymond, emphasizing the significance of creativity in planning and development of cultural tourism. Creative tourism offers a new way of redesigning the cultural landscape, including festivals, cultural routes, museums, and heritage, to have an interactive role and a more engaging experience, so to be co-created with visitors and the local population. Pine and Gilmore in 1998 elaborated on their idea of the experience economy, the notion of consumers, including tourists, in search of emotionally satisfying, memorable, personal experiences. The creative tourism is a convergence of tourism and creative economy, generating knowledge based creative activities that link producers, consumers, and places by using technology, talents, skills to generate meaningful, intangible cultural products and creative components and experiences. Again, coming back to the main topic at hand, museums as the muse. Today, museums are a lot more than repositories of artifacts and forgotten histories. They're archives, places of research, places of reflection, and have become the cradle of future development, incorporating the best of STEM to encourage and explore critical thought and provoke deeper reasoning and ensure enthralling experiences for our visitors. They are living participants and an extension of our culture and ourselves. According to some global museum stats, there are approximately 104,000 museums worldwide, according to the 2021 UNESCO report. 61% are distributed across Western Europe, North America, one third of all organizations in the United States. 8,842 museums were a direct result of the pandemic. There are about 446 private museums for modern and contemporary art currently opened around the world. 80% of the private museums open their doors in the new millennium. The global museum market is expected to generate 17.23 billion by the end of 2029, up from 7.48 billion in 2022. Museums are a catalyst for transformation. The Guggenheim Bilbao in Spain exemplifies this phenomenon. Once a dull, sleepy industrial town, Bilbao's economic fortunes and global recognition skyrocketed after the museum's construction. This, known as the Bilbao effect, highlighted the power of spillover benefits of cultural investment, revitalizing both social and economic ecosystems. The Louvre retained its spot as the most visited museum worldwide with 8.9 million visitors in 2023. The Metropolitan Museum of Art totaled revenue was 353 million for financial year 2023 and resulted in 3.9 million ticketed visitors. The emergence of a new generation of global cities of culture. A study by the University of Lausanne in Switzerland reveals a fascinating trend that the global center of culture is moving eastwards. Previously dominated by cities like Paris and New York, they're giving rise to Asian metropolises, particularly those in China and the Gulf region. Abu Dhabi, Doha are at the forefront of cities constructing state-of-the-art new museums, opera houses, and theaters. Doha has the Mathaf, the Arab Museum of Modern Art, the National Museum at Qatar, the Museum of Islamic Art. Qatar has made plans to increase its tourism sector, contributing to its GDP by 12% by 2030, as part of a strategy to solidify its position as a top international travel destination by luring in 6 million visitors yearly. Neighborhoods like the UAE have the Louvre Abu Dhabi, they have the Sharjah Art Foundation, Art Dubai, Dubai Opera. The visually distinctive Museum of the Future opened in 2022. There is more to come. There is the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi slated to open in 2025 at Saadiyat Island. There is the Zayed National Museum, the Natural History Museum. Now, turning our gaze to India, according to G. Krishna Reddy, the Union Minister of Tourism, Culture, Development of the Northeast region of India, India is home to more than 1,200 museums which serve as a vibrant tapestry showcasing the rich and diverse spectrum of our civilization's cultural, religious, scientific, accomplishments through history. The approach of garnering support from corporate sectors was adopted by some of the earliest modern ventures. In 1948, the Calico Museum of Textiles in Ahmedabad by the Sarabhais. In 1967, the Birla Academy of Arts and Culture in Calcutta. In recent years, there has been several new museums, public and private. Just to show you a visual of a few, the national museums include the National Museum Institute New Delhi, we have the Indian Museum Calcutta, we have the Victoria Memorial Hall in Calcutta, the Salarjung Museum in Hyderabad, the Allahabad Museum. We have the 3 NGMAs in Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore. New Delhi, where we are sitting, has the wonderful Kiran Nadar Museum of Art with museums in Saket and Noida, with the 3rd one opening somewhere in this neighborhood. The Museo Camera Museum, the Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya. Sorry, I didn't click. Oops. And then we have the Yug Yugin Bharat National Museum, which is under construction. The upcoming museum will be the largest in the world, showcasing the history and culture of India over 5,000 years. It will be hosted in the North-South block in New Delhi, covering 1.17 lakh square kilometers with 950 rooms. Quickly, just the museums in Mumbai, where I come from. We have the CSMVS, the Badaji Lad, and this wonderful National Museum of Indian Cinema. But what is most encouraging is the next section, is the birth of these new modern age, modern museums. We have MAP in Bangalore, which many of you all know about. We have the Indian Music Experience Museum, Bangalore. We have Preema out here is going to talk about it. We have the Bihar Museum in Patna, which is, again, a very interesting new museum that's come up in the last few years, the Partition Museum. You have smaller bespoke museums, such as Conflictorium in Ahmedabad, the Fort Aguada Jail Museum in Kandolim, though Vivek will say it's not a museum. We have the Madhya Pradesh, the Tribal Art Museum in Bhopal. Last year, the Ministry of Culture embarked on a mission to revitalize the museum landscape in the country and engage audiences. Under the leadership of Joint Secretary Mugdha Sinha, the International Museum Expo was at Pragati Maidan, New Delhi, driven by the theme of museum sustainability and well-being. A 3-day expo brought together museum professionals from all over the world and India to discuss the evolving role of museums in the future. I was honored to participate and contribute to this discussion. Preema was on one of our panels out there. There is the upcoming 2nd edition in May in Calcutta, which promises to be an exciting opportunity. And so this brings me to our topic at hand, creative tourism, museums as a muse. India boasts numerous museums brimming with potential. Today, we have a panel of experts from Goa and Bangalore who will share their extensive insights and how museums can be leveraged across the country to attract a wider audience and boost the tourism potential. Please put your hands together and welcome Preema John, Director, Indian Music Experience Museum, Bangalore, and Vivek Menezes, co-founder, curator, Goa Arts and Literature Festival. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for making the trip. I'm going to start with some opening questions. I've requested both the panelists to share a few visuals because, stories, images tell 1,000 words. Just share your practices, elaborate on how museums can become mainstays, become, a must-visit attraction for tourists, both international and domestic, on their itineraries. So I'm going to start with you, Preema. I mean, you run this wonderful museum. I don't know how many of you have been. I'm not going to do the show of hands. Vivek is going to do that later. But there's this wonderful museum, the Indian Music Experience Museum in Bangalore, that I've actually collaborated with in the pandemic days. So most of it was online, and then I had the pleasure of going and meeting Preema there last year. And it's a wonderful new creation using technology, using heritage, and creating, I would think, a museum of the future. So Preema, take us through your presentation and share this wonderful gem that is there.
You can hear me now. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Asad, for inviting me on this discussion, and also to Bridges. And thank you all so much for being here as part of the audience. It's a rare opportunity where museum directors and people working in the arts get to talk about industry and museums, especially in the context of India. So I'm very, very excited about the conversation we can have, and I hope all of you can participate as well. I want to begin by telling you a little bit about IME. We are a relatively young institution. We opened our doors in 2019. The project has been in development for almost 10 years. And we opened in 2019, and after that, of course, the pandemic hit. So we've had truly operational years of about 3 years now. The Indian Music Experience Museum is a museum that looks at the history and development of music in India. It's the only institution of its kind that does this. It's also a rare museum because there's not many museums that you see that are focused on performing arts. You usually see visual arts museums. So music museums around the world are quite rare. The origins of the museum are with our founder chairman, who is the chairman also of the Brigade Group. It's a private museum, and the Brigade Group is a developer group based out of Bangalore. And he had seen the Grammy Museum in LA and also the Museum of Pop, which used to be called the Jimi Hendrix Museum in America. And he wanted to set up a music institution in India. Because India has a very, very rich history of music, and there's no space like this. So the idea was that it took us 10 years to build the space, of course, to raise the funds and also to encapsulate this wide history that has innumerable forms in it, whether it's folk, tribal, contemporary art, Carnatic music. And we now are open and a fully functional museum. I want to show you a quick video of the museum to give you a sense of the kind of space we are. You have to understand we're located in Bangalore city, which is considered the technological hub of the country. So instead of doing a traditional visual arts two-dimensional space museum, we decided to do a digital-based museum. So it's an interactive forward museum, which is looking at storyboards, and we're able to have a lot more depth in information than would be possible in a traditional format. This is a quick 1-minute video, which will give you a sense of the space itself. So the museum, as you can see, has been built from ground up as a museum space. We have about 9 galleries at the museum, and we're spread across 50,000 square foot of space. We also have a cafeteria and a very large museum store. This is to give you a sense of why visitors would come and how much time they would spend in a space like IME. The architecture for the building has been done by a local Bangalore-based architecture firm, but the design has been done by Gallagher and Gallagher Associates, considered one of the foremost designers in terms of museum design in the world. In terms of the kind of work that we do, our work is spread across 5 verticals. This also gives us access to very many different kinds of communities who become part of our larger museum community. We do a lot of community outreach work. We also work with people from neurodivergent communities. We also work with children from socially disadvantaged backgrounds, because inclusion and diversity are one of the pillars on which IME has been built. Education, we also have a learning center. Apart from having all the other spaces that we have at the museum, we also have a school which actually has music and dance classes. We have about 200 students enrolled in that space. So a museum, as Asad was saying, is not just a space where people come and go. It's also a space where you build culture, where you have repositories of culture. They hold culture. And therefore, it's also important to build the next generation of cultural practitioners, connoisseurs, patrons, which is what the Learning Center and education enables us to do. We also do a lot of public programs, conservation and exhibition activities. For all of you who travel, and I'm sure you all do, when you go to a different city, especially when you travel internationally, if you're going back to New York, if you're going back to London, why do you keep going back to the same exhibitions and the spaces? It's the new special exhibitions that they do every year. These could be annual, these could be biannual. So that becomes a big, important part of the kind of institution a museum is. The exhibits at IME are very interactive. It's not a staid, run-of-the-mill museum. It's a very accessible space. It has been designed in this way very, very attentively. So people don't feel overpowered or overwhelmed when they come into the space. They feel like it's a space they can access. They can access information at the level they want. It's not just for one particular type of audience, it's for every kind of audience member. We do a ton of live performances as well, because there's only so much I can speak about music, and there's only so much I can read about music. You have to experience it. It is a lived live experience, so we do about 4 a month, and then many festivals as well, which I'll speak about. We also do workshops, specialist workshops. This is Aditi Ramesh, or Ditty as she is known. She did a lyric and songwriting workshop organized by my youth advisory board. I have an advisory board of young people who work with us as well. And experiences, the lady you see in the last picture is Aruna Sairam, a legendary Carnatic musician, and you're seeing her in a classroom environment at IME, which you never do. You don't get to access these legends in this way, and that are the kind of experiences we're able to give our audiences and communities. This is one of the exhibitions that we curated in the month of in the year of 2022. This was looking at birds, ecology, and music. So talking about different aspects of how the environment, nature, and music is connected. This enabled us to have, we had about 4,000, 5,000 visitors just for the exhibition, and about 40 public programs. This also helped us get a lot more people to come back, repeat visitors to the museum. Annual music festivals. All of you know Bangalore is not just a tech city, but also a music city. And a lot of people wonder, I have wondered, why is it known as a music city, apart from, of course, the wonderful concerts the city holds. So we've started an annual music festival called Many Musics, One City, which is exploring different aspects of Bangalore's music history, from classical to contemporary to rock to rap and many other genres. And this we do as part of a larger festival that happens in Bangalore called the Unboxing BLR, which started last year, which I believe and I know will drive cultural tourism into the city of Bangalore. We all come together for these 10 days to curate programs around different aspects of culture. We also do a lot of tailored interactions for corporates, for visitors, tourists coming into the city. If they get in touch with us in advance, we curate special experiences for them. That's an image of a shadow puppetry workshop from Kerala. These artists had come to do a workshop with a Google research team, which had visited the museum. So we do projects like this to enable different kinds of experiences for different types of audiences. In terms of tourism and how we are connected to the tourist network in the city, it's very important for us to be listed on some of these websites. This is still how India works. In terms of tourism and the connection with museums, it's not as advanced as one would hope. Asad mentioned many statistics. It doesn't work at the same way, especially in a city like Bangalore. It does to some extent in cities like Delhi. So here you can see we're listed on the Karnataka tourism website. We're also consistently been on the top 5 of the TripAdvisor list, which a lot of international tourists especially look to. And we've also won consistently the People's Choice Award for #1 place to visit in Bangalore city. Google reviews, these kind of things help us in getting visitors into our space. These are some visitor reviews. The top one is from the Hindi journalist Ravish Kumar, who visited early last year. And I know we don't have too much time, but I would have loved to read the comment in Hindi because he writes in Hindi. But he talks about how IME is an important, significant cultural space which the city is going to be identified with in the coming years. So these kind of visits enable us and help us in getting the word out about the institution. As I mentioned, we're also connected to a larger corporate group called the Brigade Group, and one of the verticals that we work in is hospitality, which is directly connected to tourism, of course. But we haven't been able to connect the two, the cultural intervention that Brigade Group has done and the hospitality, which is part of our work as well. And that is what I'm hoping to be able to do in the coming year. We are not just based in Bangalore, we're also based in Mysore and Hyderabad as well. So I'm hoping to leverage this network as well for IME. That's a quick overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Preema. Are you all in Google Arts and Culture?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have about 6 exhibitions up on Google Arts and Culture.
Wonderful. And she had mentioned the birdsong exhibit, and they had it's a wonderful exhibit, but besides 6,000 people plus coming to the museum, they had a wonderful program online which Avid was part of, and we had done a couple of very interesting birds in photography, birds in textiles, and bird songs, which I think Anish Pradhan did.
Yes.
So it's taking the programming also to a larger audience that doesn't even belong to Bangalore, may not have even visited, but just spreading the word. I'm going to turn to Vivek. Vivek, most of us have been outsiders, have this romantic idea of Goa, a popular tourist destination known for its pristine beaches, a vibrant nightlife, the food, the churches, convents, declared as, some of the structures are World UNESCO Heritage Sites. So take us through your Goa and specific to the topic of
Thank you,
museums.
Asad, and welcome to this conversation. I feel a bit honored to be here. A little bit of imposter syndrome also, because both of these professionals have absolutely wonderful museums, institutions, which are both landmarks, and I admire so much what you do. But I do not have that kind of institution, though I have curated a number of different things as well as the literature festival. But I'd like to start actually with a kind of show of hands. So how many people here have been to Goa? Right? Almost everyone. How many people, out of those people, how many people have been to a museum in Goa? Okay, that's an unusual crowd. Because basically, the situation in Goa, due to a combination of factors, it's a place which effectively doesn't have any museums. It has one or two little ones of quality. There is the Museum of Christian Art, which is partly funded by the Indian government, but partly funded out of Portugal, the former colonizer. There is a wonderful collection of Trinidad paintings, one of India's great artists in Panjim, which is at the Fundação Orient. It's also a Portuguese foundation. And then you have a few other little tiny places, but that's it. We have possibly the worst state museum in the country, which is saying something, and there's also an absence of museum goers. So the average person out of 100 people who come to Goa, maybe one will want to go. We have an outstanding representation here, but generally in an audience of 500 or 400, there will be 5 people who've been to a museum, which means 1 out of 100 people come to Goa. So this is a paradox, because at the same time that we have no museums and no museum goers, Goa is and has been what my friend Ranjit Hoskote calls a seedbed of artistic excellence, which has greatly enriched the rest of the country as well as Goa. So maybe some of you do not know this, so I'll just quickly recap. Like, the Indian art world now is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but it's founded substantially on the backs of people who came from Goa and the Konkan to the JJ School of Art at the turn of the century. Trinidad was one of them. And of course, Sousa and Gaitonde, kind of the fathers of representational as well as abstract art, were both Goans who came from Goa and shared roots in North Goa together. And that trajectory continues right into the 21st century. Hindustani classical music, substantially seeded by people who came out of Goa, whether it's Kishori Amonkar, her mother Mogubai Kurdikar, a very large Kesar by Kerkar, Jitendra Abhisheki, a very large collection of classical music, Western Hindustani classical. Western classical music also has a huge range of exemplars, including at the moment Dame Patricia Rosario, who's a star in London, and we have a burgeoning classical music scene in Goa, including exemplars like the Stuti Choir, which are as good as it gets anywhere really in the world, a very inclusive choir performing an amazing, ambitious repertoire in spectacular buildings. Goa also has this history of jazz, creating the sound of Bollywood. Naresh Fernandez says that the Goans created the sound of Bollywood. It includes people like Anthony Gonsalves, whose name you've all heard, but it extends till today. There's a huge interplay between Goa and Bollywood. Then, of course, in the 21st century, late 20th century and 21st century, an entirely new genre of music called Goa trance is actually hugely popular all over the world. That also emerged from Goa. Then, of course, then of course you have Remo, and currently you have maybe the most interesting fadishta, which is fado is a style of music that is Islamic Iberian style of music, but maybe the most interesting fadishta in the world is in Goa. Her name is Sonia Shirsat, and there's a whole school of fadishtas rising in her wake, if you like. There's of course the architectural heritage. We have to talk about the architectural heritage, which goes back as far as 1,000 years, but certainly in the colonial encounter, you have this marvelous vernacular, which is often mislabeled in this part of India as Portuguese house. There are no houses like that in Portugal. But you have this architecture, which is a Goan architecture, which is also quite marvelous and worth paying attention to. Then, of course, you have the landscape and the biodiversity. Goa spills into the Western Ghats from the sea, so you have this extraordinary Western Ghats biosphere, which has tremendous riches there also. And you have also the history. It's a crucible of globalization. A lot of things happened first in Goa, and they continue to happen. For instance, the culinary aspect of it, I think increasingly Goa is living up to the hype as being, the food destination of the country, perhaps even the region. So all of these things are there. In this tremendous abundance, we don't have museums and we don't have museum goers. So what do? We do a number of things, I think, and this is maybe I will show some of the slides. So over the years, Goa has become a staging ground for a lot of different events. One of them is the Serendipity Arts Festival, which comes in and out of Goa. So there are many wonderful things about the Serendipity Arts Festival. I have been a curator 3 times. But one of the interesting things about the Serendipity Arts Festival, which may be a little problematic also, is that every year a convoy of trucks comes from Delhi to Goa and sets up the festival, and millions of dollars are spent. And then at the end of the festival, the trucks are packed up again and they return to Delhi, and very little is left on the ground. So that's something to consider. I mean, over the course of the festival, if you spend $30 million, for instance, perhaps you'd like to see something out of it. But here's something that did last. This is Solomon Sousa. This is a painting by Solomon Sousa. So you may have heard of Francis Newton Sousa, the great Goan modernist. His grandson is a savant also. Sometimes genius strikes, lightning strikes in the same place. He's a very brilliant artist who paints icons. He is most famous for a huge work that he's done, does hundreds of these icons in a market in Jerusalem, which is where he lives with his family. But he came to Goa, and as part of our curation, one of the things we did is we effectively museumized walls in Panjim, as well as Saligaon, the village where he comes from. This is the first work he did. When we discovered he was 26 at the time, he really is a kind of a genius. He channels the kind of person who he's going to be painting and does this very quickly. This is an iconic figure named Sakrula. This is the poet Eunice D'Souza, also in the village of Saligaon. Eunice D'Souza is one of the found great modern poets. She was from Bombay. This is Dilip Sardesai, the great cricketer of Goan origin, who is also the father of Rajdeep Sardesai. These were all painted, each one was painted in a day on a giant wall with no preparation whatsoever, just 2 spray cans. And learning about the person half an hour before. So it's really something what this guy did. This is a person I'm particularly proud of, because this is someone the state would never have memorialized. Her name is Sita Valles, and she's one of many freedom fighters of Goan origin who took part in the freedom struggles in Africa. So Sita Valles is a renowned Marxist. She was martyred actually in Angola. But she's kind of our Che Guevara figure, a very bold, outspoken freedom fighter, rebel. So we painted her there. This is Percival Noronha, who is a famous kind of heritage activist. This is painted in an area which has become super popular with Indian tourists, and there's actually a backlash. It's one of the first places in India where there's a big backlash against Instagrammers because hundreds of them pour into this area, put their feet up on the walls, kind of make a ruckus. So this whole area now has signs saying you shouldn't take photographs. Of course, it prevents no one. But Percival Noronha, this is an example of, unfortunately, the fragility of doing this kind of cultural work, because this has been painted over, which is a masterpiece. Ironically, the Goa Tourism Department uses it in ads, just saying that this is where you should visit, but they're the ones who painted it over. This is another one I'm very proud of. This is a renowned, her name is Mary Rebello, I think, but she's the only Indian to represent India in both, at the Asian Games and the Olympics. She did it both in hockey as well as in sprints. And at the Asian Games, she won gold in one and silver in the other. This is a woman who's been petitioning for about 15, 20 years to get a Padma Shri. One has to apply in that way. She's never received it, but this is one that, but we memorialized her, and she was very happy about it. This is the great artist Angelo da Fonseca, who is a Shanti Niketan exemplar. This is another one that has been painted over by the state, unfortunately. This is a great poet, and his name is Vishnu Surya Wagh. I loved this artwork very much, but alas, it is gone. This is another thing that happens in Goa, right? So we don't have museums, but we have beautiful old buildings. This is a church where we have a tremendous choir tradition. So all through the state, you can have wonderful modern music experiences in these kinds of buildings. And we have the emergence of the Stuti choir. And this is another thing that we started to do. This was done, another of my curations for Serendipity. This is another artist named Nishant Saldana, who has repurposed one of the city statues, the mermaid, as kind of an icon for Panjim, and those are all native flowers around it. So these are some of the things we can do. So Goa does present an absolute hotbed of cultural activity and excellence, but it's doing so in a curious way where there are no suitable institutions, and there aren't actually people demanding it.
Right. Thank you for that, Vivek. So what do you mean when you actually said this, the formidable, fabled Sunshine State has fallen in popularity among high-spending tourists? I mean, since this is about tourism, so what is the most prominent factor that's responsible for this? Because Goa for us used to be this, if you look at it from the outsider's perspective, it's this penultimate, I mean, we call it the Hamptons of India, but we equate it. We call it the San Sebastian of India for the food.
I think it's a complicated picture which has changed dramatically. The trends were already there, but it's changed dramatically post-pandemic, when there's this phenomenon of something like revenge tourism, where people feel like I've been cooped up for a very long time, so I'm going to Goa and I'm going to blow off steam, and I don't care about anyone else in this picture. So there has been a kind of a vulgarization, a crassness, also a kind of brutality towards both the environment as well as the social structure, which is causing, so it's for the first time the famously laid-back Goans are quite irate about it. In fact, one of our ministers got into a big scrap with the Haryana chief minister right before the pandemic, or maybe a little bit before the pandemic, where he said, we don't want that kind of... There was a famous video of someone urinating out of a bus window as he went by Miramar. So he was like, we don't want this kind of scum. Let them take it back to Haryana. I'm sorry to say that here, but it's so close to Haryana. But so the minister, they got very irate about it. But so it is a complicated picture. The interesting thing about Goa, though, is that there has been a massive expansion in budget tourism but the high end, what you might want to call the high end, has remained stable in that. It may be drowned out a little bit, but those people are still there, which explains the proliferation of these very ambitious restaurants.
Thank you for that. Preema, I'm just going to go back to the IME's part of the Indian Museum Against Climate Change, an initiative of a growing global movement of cultural institutions taking the lead in creating a regenerative future that protects the planet. Sustainable tourism is the cornerstone of a vibrant travel sector, and it has to coexist harmoniously with the nature and culture. What is the strategic framework for museums prioritizing sustainability, and how are museums fostering a culture of sustainability?
So museums are actually some of the oldest civil society institutions that have existed in the world. Perhaps even before some of the more known universities in the world. So they are not just repositories of culture, but they're also very, very important institutions that actually in some way dictate civic life. So the responsibility is much larger than being an entertainment center, and that's a responsibility that us museum institutions are taking far, far more seriously now. And IMAC is the initiative you mentioned. In all of our cities, Bangalore as well, you all must know the massive water crisis that is happening in the city now. And I'm happy to say that we at the museum at IME have been rainwater harvesting from about 2016 onwards. And we also do wastewater treatment. We also don't use any plastic at the premises. It's not allowed. We also do composting, which we've been doing for about 5 years. We in fact sell our compost. That's the amount of compost that we're able to collect. So as much as possible, we are doing what we can. But I also have to be honest and frank that to set up a bricks and mortar institution does require electricity, does require water. So there are resources that we are tapping into. We're trying to in some way balance that out with these kind of initiatives. And for all of us museum institutions, it's a huge, huge responsibility. And my hope is that in the next 4 to 5 years that IME can become a fully solar powered institution as well.
We had done this panel for Avid. It's part of a series like I have Sustainably Now called the Green Museum. And it was very encouraging to see. We had obviously the CSMVS in Mumbai, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Vastu Sangrahalaya is a green museum. And what they've done from using a heritage structure, making it a green museum, and also wonderful cases of new museums we built. In fact, the Bihar Museum, we had the architect and it's great to see that these new structures they're building are actually in that stream. Vivek, I'm going to go back to you. I know we spoke a little bit about food, but in the beginning of 2001, the Thailand government made a concerted effort to raise the profile of the nation's cuisine. It's often acknowledged as the foundation of gastro diplomacy. And according to the World Food Travel Association, 53% of people choose their travel destinations based on food. And I mean, I know lots of friends who want to go to Goa just to eat, right? I mean, so, and you have in Goa located in Kandolim, all about alcohol, a museum that houses century-old glass vats and bottles of distilling equipment from India and the world. So how is Goa's, can the rest of India take a chapter from Goa of how they've leveraged? Because I don't think this has been a focused strategy of food or gastrotourism, or is it, it's...
No, like everything else about Goa, it's not because of the intent of the government that, this movement has happened. But it is true. There are well, I'm always envious of Thailand, Korea, countries which have put their muscle behind. I mean, Thailand literally has funded Thai restaurants all over the world, and Korea is doing something very similar with Korean food. Kids all over the world want to eat Korean food because of Hallyu, this Korean wave that is part of the government's diplomacy. So that's not happened in Goa. What has happened in Goa is that you have this large number of moneyed travelers, and you have the desire. There's this belief that you can, which is realistic, that you can sample the world. India is kind of like, for foreigners, Goa is kind of India light. And for Indians, Goa is like a window to the world. So you have had, I think, the presence of a few, there was almost an accident that happened around 20 years ago when you have the presence of a few pioneering, brilliant chefs, one of whom is Bomra Jap of Bomra's, who's
Poor guy who passed
opened
away.
maybe the best Burmese restaurant in the world in Goa. And you also had La Plage, which is extraordinary beach restaurant where you eat French food on the coconuts. And then, of course, you have Goa's own global food traditions, which are complex and interesting, which tie in a whole bunch of different places. But again, post-pandemic, there's been just an explosion. So for a long time, I was a skeptic about it. People like, I'm not going to name the names. They're all household names in Delhi. No, but people like, passing opinions about how Goa is becoming super trendy based on a few five-star restaurants or what they can get free more often. So now I won't name that famous editor.
Maybe later in the evening you can corner him into naming.
So this hype was not really justified in my view, though the food, you should not ever eat a mediocre meal in Goa, the quality is there. Pandemic and post-pandemic, it's exploded. And a good part of this is because a number of chefs who were working in other parts of the world have relocated to Goa. So I've just filed a piece on an extraordinary French restaurant that has opened in Panjim. That's very unusual to have someone cooking old-fashioned French food. And next to it you have Larder and Folk, which is an absolutely brilliant cafe opened by a woman who went to the Culinary Institute of America. So there's kind of sometimes lightning does strike. It's happened in Goa, and a number of chefs in the, let's say, very specifically 29 to 32 age group, who all grew up together, have opened these amazing new restaurants, many of them creating modern food that's interpreting local ingredients. So for the first time, the hype really is justified.
Helping tourism.
Yes.
Preema, we mentioned about the International Museum Expo of 23. You were on my panel, Transcending Boundaries, where we looked at new age museums and founders and directors like yourselves, doing interesting stuff, pushing the envelope to put that particular city on the map. So how do you look at the cumulative influence of initiatives such as this in terms of artistic expression and growth of tourism? And it's quite commendable, and I'm not a spokesperson for the government, but for a government to initiate initiatives like a museum expo to teach practitioners best practices, so everyone learns from each other.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And for those of us who were there last year for the Ministry of Culture's Museum Expo, it was a absolutely new experience. We've been in this industry for 15, 20 years. Never before has the government of India done any initiative like this. So it was the largest gathering of cultural practitioners, especially museums in the country. So I'm very glad to hear that it's happening again in Calcutta this year. A culture, I think, much like the economy is seeing quite a bit of expansion. There's culture being leveraged in very, very different ways. And there's a wave of new museums and private institutions that are coming up all over the country, and Bangalore being a big part of that as well. Just in the last 3 to 5 years, there are so many new cultural spaces that have come up. And it is important for any city, any major city, especially like Bangalore, which is a new city emerging, to have a very, very vibrant cultural landscape. And institutions help build that kind of landscape. So just in Bangalore now, you will see the IME, the MAP, Rang Shankara has been there for many years. There's a new museum on startups that's coming up. And the Science Gallery, which has just opened up its formal, larger space late last year. These institutions help build a cultural space for the citizens of the city, and in that way also enable cultural practice and artistic expression.
But I'm just jumping from my flow, but according to the Museum Tourism Market Outlook report released by Future Markets Insight, museum tourism is expected to reach 20 billion in 2022. It was 20 billion in 22. It's expected to reach 35 billion by 2032. As a director of a leading new age kind of museum, how do you stay relevant? How do you keep pushing the envelope? Because, these school museums, we have a few of them in Bombay. You go there once and you're done. I mean, why am I going back again? So how do you keep getting visitors in, and how do you also increase the non-local, I'm not saying international, but even people from Delhi and Bombay coming to Bangalore to go to IME?
Firstly, I just want to address the figures that you mentioned. I think are dollar figures. Yeah, because these figures don't exist for a country like India, but the amount of revenue that museums and cultural experiences can generate is enormous. And that's a potential that has not been tapped into properly at all, especially in India. But with visitors coming in, what Vivek was talking about Goa, there isn't a museum-going culture. Even in India, it's a resurgence of a museum-going culture, because these are new kinds of institutions, because museum as a concept came into India as a colonial legacy, and it remains a colonial legacy. It's this new wave post-liberalization with private collections coming up, private enterprises, companies wanting to set up museums, that you see this wave of new private museums in the country. And to answer your question of how do you get people to keep coming back, it's a challenge that all museum directors in institutions face.
But like the concept of collaboration. See, when you go to New York, you can buy a
Yes.
museum pass. You can go to the
Exactly.
Met, you can go to
Yeah.
MoMA, you can go here,
Yeah.
there, you buy. So
Yeah.
you have this, I mean, y'all are, according to me, the new culture capital as far as museums go, with these
Yeah.
new cutting edge museums.
Yeah.
Do you all work together? I know Unboxed,
Absolutely.
I was part of a couple of the discussions. But besides Unboxed, do you have a museum pass that takes you to all the museums?
So we don't actually have a museum pass. So what happens with private museums is also that you don't get listed on the government website because you're not a state museum. So that is one disadvantage that we face. But as practitioners in the field and as cultural institutions, we all collaborate. So whether it's the Bangalore International Center, whether it's MAP, whether it's Rang Shankara, Science Gallery, all of us collaborate. And what you also have to understand that we're trying to build cultural capital not just for tourists coming into the city, but also for the community. And Bangalore is a very, very large city. It's almost or just a little bigger than Delhi is. So if I'm doing an event on one side of town, we actually collaborate and do the same event on the other side of town. Because we happen to be in one end of town and the other institution happens to be at the other end of town. And to host one program for 150, 200 people, we feel it would be better if we do it over 2 days and host it at different times, and both institutions get to garner a new kind of audience coming into our spaces. So we absolutely do collaborate and don't see each other as rivals in any way.
Your Unboxed, I think, is a very interesting concept. Ravi was at our conference in Bombay and he talked about it. And Mumbai has something called the Mumbai Festival, which is again backed by the Ministry of Tourism, trying to garner tourism in Mumbai, getting the whole city to come together, including the marathon, Collaborators Festival. I did stuff at the Opera House. It was interesting to see everything coming under one umbrella, but I don't know if it's too much at one point of time versus having it spread through the year. But Vivek, I'm going to go back to you talking about the Goa Arts and Literature Festival that you co-founded. You're the co-curator. It's been around since 2010, volunteer-driven, non-profit. What has been some of the biggest challenges and learnings, and how has, in the area of audience engagement, and how have you observed the shift of the demographics of the audiences coming to these festivals?
Great question. I think that the audiences have shifted. One of the advantages of starting when we did, which is a long time ago, is that we basically grew our own audience from young people. And the young people who came as students now are die-hard regulars at our festival. Also, I think there's really an unlimited desire for high-quality engagement with ideas, really. And if you can continually do that and bring unusual people, we have some unusual factors with the Goa Arts and Literature Festival in that we've not just grown our audience, but we've also grown audiences that didn't exist before in Goa. So, for instance, when we started our festival because we realized that the great Konkani writer Damodar Mauzo and myself, we part of Goa Writers Group, we realized that very, very quickly the publishing world was coalescing in Delhi. This happened only about 20 years ago. Previously, it was scattered, but with the entry of multinationals, it was coalescing in Delhi, and there was a kind of an emerging Delhi consensus about what's good, what's bad, who are the writers to watch, who are not. And most of them are from Delhi. And we found that us in Goa were being completely ignored. Damodar Mouse was a great writer, for instance, and you're never being invited to any of these festivals. So we had the flash, which proved to be correct, that not only were we not being invited, but we will never be invited. So we started a festival for those people who are effectively being excluded from this Delhi consensus, and that included writers of the Northeast, writers from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, because we have these, Nepal, we have these deep cultural connections, as well as entire genres like poetry in English and other languages, translations, graphic novels. So we doubled down on those things, those areas. And so new audiences have been built for them. So people like Mamang Dai or Robin Gangom have got huge followings in Goa now. And it's been a wonderful back and forth. So our festival's a little bit unique in that sense. But the young audiences that we have, now a number of people are coming into Goa for these kinds of events. So we are getting cultural tourists. The International Film Festival gets thousands of people. A good half of them come from Kerala, but the remainder half comes from around the world and India. Serendipity has done a phenomenal job of bringing people in, and every cultural practitioner in India, it seems, wants to come for Serendipity, or has been to Serendipity, or will come for Serendipity. And other events like this. Of course, there's also music festivals like Sunburn and others. These draw in thousands of young people.
There was Think.
Think, when it started, was absolutely phenomenal. We had never seen anything like it. Everyone who you wanted to meet or read about in the world came for Think. So there are these amazing things, and I think you are seeing. The great news in India is that you're seeing a very engaged new traveler, and we are seeing large numbers of them from cities like Bangalore and Bombay who are educated. They've got some international experience. They're sensitive. They're looking for cultural. So we don't have museums, but we have curated walks. I'm a member of the Goa Heritage Action Group, which does walk festivals. They're always fully subscribed. That means if you have a walk in Panjim, whatever the capacity is, that many young people show up for that. We have other wonderful things also, like you mentioned the Alcohol Museum, but there is something quite unique in India, which is called Kazulo, which is started by my friend Hansel Vaz, where you go and you see how Feni is made. Feni is still pot distilled in like mezcal. So he treats it like mezcal, and you sit in a spring and you sample different kinds of food with a tasting. So the paradox in Goa is that you do have some of the highest quality, I think, tourism experiences that any tourist can have, but they're a little bit drowned out by this kind of white noise of casinos and hedonism and things like that, which so that's the case in Goa.
Just so I know, in the interest of time, I'm going to start wrapping up. This week I read some very interesting articles on the museum space. In fact, the Adani Group is supporting a green energy gallery in the Science Museum in London. At Tiffany's in New York, there's an exhibition of creativity of culture using, priceless pieces of art are incorporated with the jewelry, creating a shopping experience, but also making it a museum-like experience where you don't have to pay the ticket price of the Met or the MoMA, but you get into Tiffany's, have a glass of bubbly, and watch art, and maybe steal a piece of jewelry. But so what are some of the, interesting best practices? As I was going to quote you on something you had said early last year about there is not a single place for Goan art or Goan art or heritage in a museum setting in Goa. But what are some of the best, we like to future gaze and be optimistic, is my personal opinion, for both of you all, some of the best practices one can include to put Goa, to put Bangalore on that tourism map. Because, tourism at the end of it is bringing revenue, which is support, and with the arts and culture, it's supporting the creative economy, which is the most important part. And as soon as people realize, most of us who work on it realize that it exists, but it has to be amplified, is it does support, it does bring in money, it does support. You see what happens in Durga Puja. There's a report that has been put out by FICCI and the West Bengal government of the revenue that is generated by Durga Puja. So what best practices, ideas, pie in the sky, wishful thinking can you all share as closing comments for the future of museums as a muse to generate tourism?
I think in the case of Bangalore, this is not so much, wishful thinking. It's thankfully already happening for the city. Uh, I'm also from Delhi and Bombay, so just a disclaimer. And I've seen this happen for cities like Delhi and Bombay as well. But, Bangalore is doing it in a new way. And that is what is so exciting for us as practitioners to be in Bangalore and to see this new wave. And there is the potential of doing it differently and doing it in a far more focused and in a way that people and communities and especially visitors and audiences can actually become part of that process. So one big way forward for us is to firstly set up quality institutions to give people quality experiences. They need to be not only, of value for the cities, but also for the countries and for the larger world community. And also collaboration. I can't emphasize this enough. We all need to work together to not just set up new institutions. I think we also need to revive some of the older institutions which are actually fantastic spaces. So the other project that the Brigade Group is working on is the Venkatappa Art Gallery, which is a state-run gallery space that has been defunct for the last 15, 20 years. It's also directing patronage in a way that allows spaces that are required for art practice, art viewing, and enjoyment to be revived and run in a way that is sustainable for the future. So I'm extremely hopeful for what's happening in the country, and I also know of several projects that are coming up all across. It's almost like China was, about 10, 15 years back when I remember there was one year when they were setting up 4,000 museums.
No one goes in them, though. That's a slight problem.
Yeah, there were many problems with that as well, but I know there are so many new projects coming up all over the country. So it's a very, very exciting time. It's a time when the concept of museums, which is a colonial concept, is being brought into a completely new phase. And I think we're driving it. So that's very exciting.
Thank you. This idea about the museum as a colonial construct, it's actually, in some ways, the modern museum was birthed in India because the Bahuda Jila used to be the it was the Victoria and Albert, and the people who set up the Victoria and Albert in Bombay then went and set up the Victoria and Albert. So there's a collecting kind of angle to it, which has its issues. Having said that, I do think it's a crime, for instance, in Goa, that generations have grown up without ever seeing a Sousa or Gaitonde, which you can see in Delhi, to its credit. I mean, it's a kind of cultural crime. And people don't know who Kesar Bai Kerkar is necessarily, or Kishori Amonkar. These are problems. But what my solution to it and my idea is that instead of treating, so the reason we don't have a museum, and in fact our existing collections and museums have been destroyed in an overall collapse of government. So governance is broken in Goa. You may not know this, but it's relevant. Over 100 years ago, they set up a museum in Goa. The citizens of Goans, set up a museum and collected Renoir, Pizarro, George Gross, right? These were nationalized about 30 years ago and disappeared, right? And since then, Gaitonde gave beautiful painting canvases to the Kala Academy, which have also disappeared. And Kala Academy, which was a jewel of an art center, has been destroyed by renovation. Actually destroyed. The roof has come down after spending $10 million on it. So, in the absence of governance, which appears to be a near permanent feature in Goa, at least, I would like to look at museumizing the state. The way that we consume art and culture. Goa has an abundance of it, and they are absolutely marvelous experiences. I was a little bit hurt, Asad, when you said that why go to Goa now? Why should we go to Goa? You can go to Thailand, cheaper.
That was off the record, by the way.
But yes, we are all for tourism. That's the purpose. But the point is that it misses out, because actually what you can have when you have a daughter, you can have the most marvelous cultural and environmental experiences very easily in Goa if you just spot them out, right? There's a very long list of these things that you can do. So I think that I am hopeful. The reason I'm hopeful is because the younger generation of Indian tourists, there is a critical mass of them who are interested in culture and are sensible, sensitive individuals, and they are driving good change in Goa.
Right. But thank you for these comments and these insights. I think one part which we didn't touch upon is education. Education is very important, not just from the school levels of educating in our education, curriculum, encouraging students and people that museums are important parts of their education. But on the flip side, for practitioners, where are our courses on museology? How are you going to, if you build these beautiful buildings, you need people to run it. And that is one big gap that's there, is having qualified professionals, because there's no education to teach them or train them. But that said, I think there's wonderful work happening in the space. We didn't touch about the metaverse, which also has lovely museums in there, looking at the online space, which cannot be neglected or ignored. I mean, it is the way the younger kids are going to be consuming museums and artifacts and learning, but you can never substitute being in a museum, looking at that little small Mona Lisa, thinking it's really big before you actually saw it, or seeing it online. So museums are here to stay. They're a very important part of our cultural fabric, and hopefully our tourism economy, and hopefully a good ally for the rare group to be getting in all these wonderful tourists, not only just international, but also Indians, because there's a lot of money in this country at the moment. I have lots more to talk, but I'm very time sensitive. I've gone 7 minutes over my time, which I never do. But thank you for being such a great panel. And thank you for not falling asleep. And one person fell asleep, I have to confess. I'm not saying who, but thank you for being here. And Shobha, thank you once again to you and your team for giving us this opportunity.